Shop Paper Manual, a handbook for comrades active in shop paper work. Introduction. The role of the shop paper in the class struggle in view of the strenuous efforts being made to orientate the party work to the shop and to root the party firmly in the shop. The development of activity in the field of shop papers becomes more and more essential in party work. The shop paper is the sharpest weapon in mass agitation in the arsenal of the active communist. The shop paper is the communist organ in the shop, reaching the proletariat as no other organ of the party can. Shop paper work is extremely exacting work, demanding a patience and accuracy which few other fields of communist activity require. At the same time, it is a field of work in which our comrades have the least experience, due almost entirely to an underestimation and lack of appreciation of the importance of this effective weapon for capturing the fortresses of the working class, as Lenin calls the factories. In getting out a shop paper, its fundamental function, that of being the communist organ in the shop, must never be lost sight of. The shop paper naturally treats of shop problems and the everyday life of the worker of the shop, but it must also interpret to the shop worker all events which affect his life, even in the most indirect way. This requires a political orientation which every communist organ naturally has. To awaken the class consciousness of the worker, to defend his interests in all spheres, to widen his horizon of outlook to include the entire working class and all current events, to draw political and organizational conclusions from his problems and from the problems of the entire working class, to develop his feelings of class solidarity, to intensify his fighting spirit, to draw him closer to the party. These are the by no means insignificant tasks of the shop paper. And as the time draws nearer for the illegality which will face our party, the shop paper must do its share first in fighting stubbornly for the party's right to legality. And should the party be driven underground or the general party organs suppressed, it becomes of enormous importance in replacing to some extent the general party organs which are prohibited. In its very nature and from its very inception, the shop paper has a semi-illegal character. It is the best weapon, therefore, to take up and carry on our agitational and propaganda work when the daily worker and other general party organs face all the tremendous difficulties of illegality. It is then that the shop papers become the basis for our entire mass agitation. In our German party, not only every shop nucleus, but every street nucleus issues a small party paper. The policy of the German party, which is being put into effect, is that every party unit owns its own duplicating machine and puts out its own paper. In Hamburg, this was realized to the extent of creating almost 500 shop and neighborhood papers in the various units of the party. Early in 1930, the party organ, the Hamburger Volkszeitung, with a circulation of about 30,000, was suppressed for a period of 10 days. During this period, our shop papers and neighborhood papers came out daily with an average circulation of 1,000, which meant that the 30,000 copies of the Hamburger Volkszeitung were replaced by 500,000 copies of shop papers and neighborhood papers during the period of this suppression. Our American party has not yet reached this stage of development, but we must foresee such situations and prepare ourselves for them. We must develop our shop papers and train ourselves in this work. Thus, a handbook to guide the comrades who participate in this sphere of communist activity, a handbook which treats of all the aspects of the work exhaustively, is absolutely essential at this time, especially in view of the backwardness of our party in this work. The following is the first pamphlet on the subject of shop papers to be printed in this country. It necessarily has all the defects and omissions which arise from the party's inexperience in this field of activity. The section dealing with the difficulties of distribution especially is inadequate. This is one of the most important and most difficult problems in connection with getting out a shop paper. But in view of our lack of experience, it was necessary merely to throw up the various problems which have to be met in various places, without in many cases suggesting concrete solutions. It would be wise to issue a special small pamphlet in the near future devoted purely to the subject of distribution, compiled from the experiences gained by our comrades, the difficulties met, and the methods used to overcome them. Until that is issued, the present section on distribution will have to suffice. December, 1930. Gertrude Hazler. Part 1. The political aspects of shop paperwork. If we keep in mind our definition of the shop paper, that it is the communist organ in the shop, we realize that this implies two things. 1. That the paper must express the political interpretations of the party, and not become merely a shop newspaper with a purely trade union orientation organizationally, and on the other hand, must guard against becoming too abstract politically, divorced from shop conditions. Politically, the paper must treat of working class problems as a whole, linking up the material with shop conditions on the one hand, and with the party campaigns on the other. It must interpret working class problems locally, for instance, the lapse of the rent acts in New York City, nationally, the Hoover Green no-strike agreement, and internationally, unemployment, war danger, Soviet Union, etc. It must deepen the political understanding of the workers in the shop. It must explain clearly and simply how, for instance, the machinist at the automatic lathe is affected by the disarmament conference, a thing which seems so remote to the average worker. If the paper deals too exclusively with political questions, it becomes simply a bad substitute for a political leaflet, and if it deals too exclusively with shop problems, it fails to raise the political level of the workers in the shop. The greatest difficulty, and also our greatest task in dealing with political problems, is to link them up with shop conditions, to show the workers how every current event in the world affects his working and living conditions, and those of his whole class. On the basis of shop conditions, the paper must make it clear to the masses how the maneuvers of trust capital, the intrigues of the fascist AF of L, and its social fascist left wing, the concentration of capital and rationalization, the nature of the bourgeois state, class collaboration, imperialist armament races, the preparations for war against the Soviet Union, how all these affect the everyday life and working conditions of the masses, resulting in more intensive exploitation, growing misery, increasing political oppression, and in more brutal methods to stifle all efforts of the workers to change these conditions. How to make such things as these clear to an unclass-conscious needle trades worker in a New York sweatshop, or to a mountaineer textile mill hand in North Carolina, or to a Negro farmer from the South who has just taken a job in the Ford factory in Detroit, or to a Mexican agricultural laborer in the Imperial Valley, that is the task of the shop paper, a difficult task, but one which must be dealt with if the shop paper is to be a genuine communist organ. Stereotyped editorials must therefore be avoided. We can no longer hand out the monthly political editorial to the various shop nuclei from the district center, printing the self-same article in every paper in the district. The same subject, of course, and the same fundamental line for all, but linked up with the special shop conditions and made intelligible and interesting to the workers of that particular shop and industry. On the opposite page are examples of what is meant by linking up a political article with actual immediate shop conditions. These were articles which actually appeared in two different shop papers during the party's election campaign. The one on the left shows a splendid approach to the subject on the basis of shop conditions, developing from that premise the analysis of what the various parties stand for, and ending with good slogans well placed. The Vote Communist articles contrasted a remote introduction, right side of the page. The Communist Party of Germany in the recent election campaign has just demonstrated in a striking manner that it is a mass party with a following of more than 412 million of workers and poor farmers. The Communist Party is the leading party in Berlin. It has received 750,000 votes in Berlin, thus making it the foremost party. The German workers showed the way to the American workers what must be done in the coming elections. Our conditions are becoming worse every day. We are forced to work 9-12 hours a day at the rate of 60 units per hour. If the company catches a worker talking or smiling, he is fired immediately. The speed up is great, and as a result hundreds of workers are laid off and many accidents occur. The capitalist parties, Democrats, Republicans, and Socialists do not present any program for the abolition of the speed up or shortening of the working day and relief for the unemployed. Their main plank is wet or dry. Is this the main issue today? Isn't unemployment a much more important issue for every worker? The Communist Party, however, proposes the workers' social insurance bill and pledges itself to carry on a determined struggle for its passage. The only way this can be accomplished is by the workers, both employed and unemployed, to organize together under the leadership of the Communist Party. Workers. Fight for the workers' social insurance bill. Vote communist. Linking up with shop conditions. Left side of the page. 500 men laid off, the rest working 3 days a week, and more thrown out every day. That is the way things are in Ford's now. 500 men locked out of the shop, thrown into the streets, increasing the number of the millions of unemployed. The rest of us making wages for 3 days a week. With the army of pushers on our backs, taking advantage of the situation to abuse us more than humans can stand. Anything is considered a good enough excuse to throw a worker out of a job. Winter coming, with no relief in sight. The AFL says unemployment insurance is not necessary because prosperity is just around the corner. The Democrats say the Republicans are to blame, but they don't tell us how they will change it. Talk a lot about unemployment, but don't do anything. The Republicans say it is too bad, but they can't help it, and anyway it is good for the country, as now business can get back on a sound basis, more speed up, more layoffs. The socialists say unemployment is terrible, we must study it. In the meantime, the AFL is wise not to call any strikes in a period of depression. Let the bosses cut wages, increase speed up, but the workers must cooperate in helping to bring the country back to normal, if they don't starve first. Only the Communist Party tells the workers to do something, to fight for unemployment insurance, to fight against evictions of workers from the homes, to demand work or wages, to refuse to starve. Workers. Vote against starvation, speed up, and layoffs. Vote communist. The above are articles which appeared in shop papers, the one on the left showing a splendid approach to the subject, on the basis of shop conditions, the one on the right giving an approach without interest to politically undeveloped workers, with the shop approach hidden in the body of the article, and not properly linked up with the subject. The one on the right is an example of how not to approach the workers on a political issue. Politically undeveloped workers don't give a hang what the communists in Germany happen to be doing. They are interested in fighting their own wretched conditions right here in the shop, and don't get the same thrill out of the successes of our German comrades that our party members do. This must be kept carefully in mind in approaching these undeveloped workers. In this article, shop conditions seem to be dragged in by the tail, in the middle of the article, without any connection with the German elections. And the analysis of what the other three parties are doing doesn't make it clear to the shop worker that these parties not only do not help them, but are actually their enemies. And the analysis of the party position is simply one of struggling to get a bill passed through Congress, with the slogans at the end crowded, and again too remote from the shop conditions. Part 2, Shop Conditions and Trade Union Work. Again, keeping in mind that the shop paper is the organ of the Communist Party in the shop, we must, in dealing with shop abuses, champion the worker in his day-to-day struggle in the shop and propose immediate solutions where they exist. Pushing trade union organization becomes, therefore, one of the paramount tasks of the shop paper. We must, at the same time, guard against allowing the paper to become simply a trade union organizer, and must never allow our political work and our ultimate goal, the overthrow of the capitalist system, to be pushed into the background by these immediate aims and solutions. In handling the shop conditions, the tendency must be guarded against of simply pointing out abuses and allowing the workers to draw their own conclusions as to the proper remedy. Our party work is orientated toward reaching the great masses of unorganized, and in getting out our shop paper, which is the best avenue we have to reach these unorganized workers, we must be very specific in our organizational recommendations. It is not enough either to say that joining a union will remedy certain abuses. Tell which union, tell something about it, give its address, explain its form of organization on the basis of shop committees, warn against the fakery of AFL officials and must-eyed reformists, all in simple language. For do not forget that it is precisely the unorganized worker who has no tradition of organization, who has no knowledge of the benefits to be derived from a union, who does not realize the role of union organization in the class struggle, in fact, who must be taught from the very beginning the simplest fundamentals of worker solidarity. Our aim has always been the establishment of real functioning shop committees as a basis for a strong union organization. In many cases, a transitional organization leading ultimately to the formation of the shop committee will be necessary, which can take the form of a grievance committee for organizing the workers for struggle on the basis of grievances in the shop and for the partial demands arising from them. The grievance committees will rally the workers to fight against rationalization and oppression in the factories, and should be used as a means of establishing the unions openly in the shop, struggling at the same time for the freedom of the workers to assemble, speak and agitate in the factories, which demand must be raised in all strike struggles. One of the principal tasks of a shop paper must be to initiate actions on the part of the workers in the shop, even if it is on a small scale, for we cannot expect to have an immediate movement for strike action without some preparation and struggle. One small instance, which is not of much importance in itself, but which illustrates how the shop paper can gain prestige among the workers for the party, is the case where the paper roused the workers to give expression to their resentment against the cutting off of the Christmas bonus which they were accustomed to getting. When the notice of the boss was posted, the shop paper initiated a movement demanding that the bonus be paid to the workers, asking them through the shop paper to chalk up the entire shop with the word bonus and indicate their demands for the payment of this bonus. This was done throughout the entire shop. The effect was splendid not only on the workers, but upon the party. The workers had an outlet for expressing their discontent, and in following the suggestion in the shop paper, they recognized the leadership of the shop paper in their struggles, even though these struggles weren't sharp. Such small matters, as they gradually accumulate, build up a strike movement when a big issue comes, and the shop paper becomes the accepted spokesman of the workers in their larger struggles. In starting the shop paper, have the trade union policy of the party which applies to that shop clearly in mind. Then follow a conscious definite policy of unfolding an organizational plan in the shop, developing it with each new number of the paper in accordance with developing conditions in the shop and the response of the workers. Only a consistently carried out policy will bring the organizational results. At the same time, the district industrial department and the union must be ready to do concrete organizational work in the shop. We can hammer away at the necessity of organizing for months and months, stir up a great deal of interest in union organization among the workers, and if we are not organizationally ready to receive them, all that work is lost. Everything that happens in the shop, whether insignificant or important, must be taken advantage of to draw the proper organizational conclusions, hammering away at the necessity of the union, but also drawing the ultimate conclusions of the necessity of abolishing the capitalist system. If there is an accident in the shop, if there is a wage reduction, if a worker is arbitrarily fired, if a foreman is unusually hard-boiled, any of these can be used as a basis of pointing out the necessity of mass solidarity and the futility and danger of individual protest. Stress solidarity with other unions and foster the feeling of working-class solidarity not only on a national scale but on an international scale as well. This can be done by carrying news of workers' struggle outside the shops, appeals for strikers in other places in the same industry or in other industries. In this respect, conditions in Soviet Russia must always be featured, with the proper conclusion of how to get them for ourselves. A conscious policy must also be followed in popularizing labor unity among the shop workers. It is very necessary that this be conscientiously done not only for the development of the workers themselves, but also to give labor unity the mass base it needs. Fight the company unions, whatever their guise, industrial conference, athletic clubs, mutual aid organizations, etc., either capture them and make them serve the workers, which is difficult, but it has been done, or smash them by exposing them. But don't create illusions as to what the union can give the workers. Never fail to stress that it is only the overthrow of the capitalist system that can do away with the abuses from which the working class is suffering today. Part 3, Special Subjects Divide and Rule is the slogan of the boss when he takes advantage of the special problems created by certain divisions of the working class. To meet this well-known device of the bosses, the shop paper must make every effort to deal with the special interests of those workers who, in addition to the general exploitation from which all workers suffer, are the constant target of special discrimination and exploitation. As far as the women are concerned, not only must the shop workers be given special attention, but also the wives of the men workers, for a clear understanding of the class struggle on their part will do much to raise the morale of their husbands. Every effort must be made to involve these housewives in any class struggle activity within the shops. The increasing role which the young workers are playing in industry and their strategic position in the class struggle when war breaks out makes careful attention to their problems absolutely imperative. The clannishness of the various foreign-born and their prejudices against each other, which are deliberately fostered by the bourgeoisie, are very strong and require constant combating. This is particularly true of the colored foreign-born, such as the Chinese, Japanese, Filipinos, Hindus, Mexicans, etc. But there is one section of the working class in America which occupies a unique position, and that is the Negro. His problem, in addition to that of being a doubly exploited member of the working class, and of suffering from race discrimination, is that of being a member of an oppressed national minority within the country, struggling for national expression and national self-determination. This must be taken carefully into account in any dealing with the problems of the Negro, creating a special situation even compared to the other doubly exploited sections of the American working class. Where any such section of workers comprises a large part of the employees, special pages or special columns should be devoted in the shop paper to their problems. If the situation warrants it, a special youth paper should be issued, or perhaps the party and league can issue a joint paper. Where large sections of workers speak a foreign language, a page devoted to material of special interest to them and written in their language should be set aside. This invites the confidence of those workers who, due to language handicaps, have great difficulty in taking their place in the general class struggle in this country. These workers should be encouraged to contribute so that they feel that these special sections belong to them. The main object in running these special sections is to increase the feeling of solidarity of the workers of the entire plant, irrespective of the lines drawn by sex, color, age, and nationality, and thus to create more solid fighting ranks when the inevitable clashes against the employer occur. To foster this feeling of solidarity in a systematic and tactful manner is one of the chief duties of the shop paper in any factory where these divisions in the ranks of the workers exist. Not only to win over these doubly exploited sections, not only to explain to them the role which the employers force them to play, but also to make it clear to the other workers, who are in a relatively better position, how the employer is keeping them divided, is the duty of every shop paper. In a clear and sympathetic handling of such situations we can win over this doubly exploited type of worker and also do away with the prejudices against him on the part of other workers which the employer so consciously fosters. Part 4. Organizational aspects of shop paper work. In the practical matter of getting out a shop paper, two things must be kept in mind. The aim must be to have the paper issued regularly, and the greatest care must be taken that everything written is absolutely accurate. Regularity instills confidence in the paper and in the party on the part of the workers, and allows a more consistent organizational policy to be carried out. Accuracy is absolutely essential, for if we print news which is false, based merely on rumor, then instead of becoming the leaders of the workers, we simply become the laughingstock of the shop. How the nucleus works. All this requires that the members of the nucleus itself assume the main responsibility for gathering and getting the material ready for issuing. The habit which some of the districts have, of merely inquiring from the workers what the conditions are in the shop, and writing the paper from above, is absolutely a wrong basis for issuing a shop paper. It is easy to make mistakes that way, and it is imperative that the nucleus members see every word of the paper when it is ready to be printed. The main reason, however, for making the nuclei members do their own gathering and getting out of material is to make it really a paper for the shop, an organ of the communist nucleus with the complete responsibility in the hands of the nucleus. This does not mean that the workers must not get all necessary help from the district, political guidance, technical apparatus, etc. Also, if no member of the nucleus has a sufficient command of English, the district must attach one or two comrades who can write, but always in close cooperation with the workers themselves. Thus we train our own comrades to watch their shop events and to interpret them for their fellow workers. Thus we give the paper a real base in the shop and avoid the sad experiences where 5 or 6 shop papers would collapse at one time when the district organizer, who has personally written all the papers himself, would be transferred elsewhere. The best method yet found in getting out a well-rounded, politically correct and accurate shop paper, especially in nuclei where it is necessary to attach outside comrades to do the actual writing, is to have a meeting of the shop paper committee of the nucleus, or, where the nucleus is small, and all members are responsible for the shop paper of the entire nucleus, including the attached members, about a week before the paper is due to be issued. Here the events in the shop are discussed, the proper conclusions drawn, the method agreed upon of linking the current political article, dependent on the current party campaigns, with the shop conditions, and the material apportioned out among those who will write it. The interpretations and conclusions must, however, be suggested by the members working in the shop, which does not always mean that they will be correct. But every member must be encouraged to help in the interpretive tasks of the work and even to write the articles, no matter how bad the English, leaving for the attached comrades merely the task of improving style and clarity. Only thus will we train our members and push the work forward. The spirit of the workers in the shop can be caught only by our own comrades who share in the daily work and the daily exploitation in that shop, and to catch this atmosphere is infinitely more important than correct style and pleasing language. 5 days should be enough for the comrades to write up their material. Then another meeting is held to go over the finished material. Here the members in the shop again play the main role, for whether they have written the material themselves or merely given the information for others to write, it is absolutely necessary for them to see every word before it is printed to make sure that the material they gave was not misunderstood or misinterpreted by those not working in the shop. This requires a great deal of patience, but it must be done. When everything has been verified, the material should be ready for distribution to the workers within 2 days. Somewhere in the process the district or section must see the material to ensure its political correctness. That is a detail which can be determined best by local conditions. There is no excuse for taking longer than a week to get out the paper complete, and there is every reason for rushing it as fast as circumstances permit. It has frequently happened that the getting out of the paper has taken so long that the news was old by the time it got into the hands of the workers. Sometimes the paper contained announcements of events that had taken place in the meantime. This is inexcusable and creates a bad impression among the workers. In the technical work of the paper it is again best if the members in the shop do as much of the work as the technical knowledge required permits. This again with the object of fostering in the members the spirit that the work of the shop paper is their work, it is their organ, to bring their communist views before their fellow workers. But the nucleus must never forget, even where it is small, and where the entire nucleus is drawn into activity in connection with the shop paper, that this is not their only function in the shop. Responsibility and concentrated activity in getting out a shop paper does not absolve the nucleus members from the general activity within the shop. Distribution. When it comes to distribution, no set rule can be followed, since local conditions will determine the most feasible plan. Every effort should be made to distribute the paper inside the mill. This is extremely difficult, for every precaution must be taken not to expose the comrades working within the factory, not only to protect them against losing their jobs, but mainly to keep our base in that factory. Careful plans must be made beforehand each month to determine the strategy of distribution within the factory, in order to accomplish the distribution without interference and to ensure that each worker gets his copy. Those workers who are not attached to a certain place within the factory, but who have freedom of movement within the building, such as carpenters, electrical workers, painters, repairmen, cleaning women, messenger boys, etc., should be used as much as possible if they can do this work without detection. Advantage must be taken of any connections with any sympathetic worker within the factory who might facilitate this work. Sympathetic foremen, who are willing to close their eyes to these proceedings, at least till it gets hot for them personally, can sometimes be found. A successful scheme was carried out in New York where a comrade not working in the shop after careful instructions from the nucleus, boldly walked into the shop during the noon hour. The workers ate their lunch in the shop, and brazenly distributed the paper with a hostile foreman looking on. Such schemes work once or twice and should be used, but of course they cannot be depended upon. But there are hundreds of other ways of distributing within the shop. The papers can be distributed on the various raw materials which the workers are handling, on the conveyors, on the benches, and the clothes closets, and the toilets, elevators, stairs. Small supplies can be left here and there and word passed around that they are available. These supplies should be replenished as soon as they are exhausted, but large amounts simply invite confiscation. Inside secret distribution must take place 1 or 2 days before outside distribution. Inside distribution never reaches every worker, and those who didn't receive a copy will be on the lookout to get one at the gates a day or 2 later. If, however, outside distribution takes place first, the boss and stool pigeons will be on the lookout and inside distribution becomes very dangerous. Where it is found to be absolutely impossible to distribute the paper within the factory, then comrades who do not belong to the nucleus must undertake the distribution outside the factory gates. This involves the same caution and the same risks as any leaflet distribution, except that the employer is much more apt to be more aggressive in combating this distribution, since it hits him more directly than a general political leaflet or call to a general mass meeting. In some towns this is extremely difficult, company towns, for instance, or small towns with one large factory where all inhabitants know one another. These difficulties peculiar to local conditions must be solved according to the situation which exists. For instance, where the workers get into the streetcars or buses within the factory gates, ingenuity is necessary to get the paper to them. It has even been found necessary to make a general distribution at streetcar transfer corners as the workers get off the cars, or in the districts where many of them live. As a last resort, if a list can be obtained, the papers can be sent by mail to the workers in their homes, but this is not only an arduous task, but is undesirable in other ways. It has sometimes been found feasible to leave a small supply with some friendly shopkeeper near the factory, and word passed around the factory that the paper is available there. The supply must be replenished as quickly as it is exhausted to ensure that workers who want them can get them, but large amounts should not be left for fear of confiscation. With the party concentrating more on detailed work and the building up of contacts through patient personal work, it is imperative that the shop paper also be used in such activity. For instance, the comrades inside the factory may notice that a certain worker is sympathetic, or perhaps the worker at the next machine looks like a good subject for propaganda. By taking the number of the worker's badge and finding out from his time card, which bears the same number, what his name and address is, the shop paper can either be sent to him direct by mail or delivered to him by some comrade not working near him. A gradual building up of such a mailing list or such personal contacts is invaluable for the other activities of the nucleus within the shop. In connection with the building up of a mailing list, the experience of the Ford worker in Detroit might be taken as an example. 300 or 400 workers in the factory subscribed to the paper, and this mailing list constantly grew, extending beyond Detroit. Workers in Ford shops throughout the country, and even some in Europe, put themselves on the mailing list, paying the subscription price. Such a mailing list must be strictly adhered to. Note, this section is necessarily inadequate, due to lack of experience in meeting the various difficulties that arise in various places. It would be advisable to issue a small pamphlet dealing exclusively with this subject in all its details, written by a group of comrades who have had varied experiences in this connection. Until this is done, this section, which merely raises the problems without attempting to solve them in all cases, must suffice, and the comrades must use all their initiative and originality in overcoming whatever difficulties are placed in their way. Financing the paper. The question of whether to sell the paper or hand it out is not only a problem of distribution, but also one of the general problems of financing the paper. The ideal to be aimed at is to make the paper self-sustaining. If the paper gains the prestige it should have as a live communist organ, it will gradually come to be financed by the workers in the factory, but a financial start must be given to it, just as to any new paper launched by the party. One of the biggest mistakes in the past has been to have the district finance the entire paper, without the nuclei making any effort whatever to raise the funds in some way. The claims of the nuclei numbers that it is impossible to raise any money have been proven false. There are various ways of raising the money. The paper has been sold successfully in many instances. The drawbacks here are first of all the difficulties already pointed out in distribution, but also that the workers are afraid to be seen buying the paper, whereas they are perfectly willing to accept it when it is thrust into their hands. Also, the hurry of distribution makes making change, etc. difficult. The German party has found it feasible to pass out small handbills some days before distribution, telling something about the paper, appealing for funds, giving the price, the date when it will be distributed, and asking the workers to have the correct change ready. This is not always advisable, since it will bring down the watchfulness of the employer upon the distributors. The objective situation at present, however, makes it more and more possible to sell the paper. Perhaps the first time the paper is issued, and even the second issue, can be distributed free, after which we must insist, however, that the paper be sold. The first few times that it is sold, it may happen that hundreds of copies are left on our hands, and hundreds of workers go without the paper, but this should not discourage the comrades, for as the paper gains in popularity, more and more papers will be sold each time. Especially if the paper has had an effective distribution within the factory before selling it at the gate, the fact that all the workers were not reached should not be used as an excuse to return to free distribution. In Detroit, where many shop papers are issued in large factories, a comrade was put on full-time to sell them, and the papers were so issued that he was kept busy throughout the month, actually making his living out of the sales, besides paying for the printing of the papers. But money must be raised among the workers in other ways. If the paper cannot begin to build itself up on the spirit of cooperation and self-sacrifice of the workers during this period of revolutionary upsurge, then there is something wrong with the paper in not being able to awaken this spirit among the workers. The paper must be based on the workers. If it is not, then we stand in danger of being isolated from the broad masses and all our activity because of the financial weakness of the party in general. It is possible to circulate collection lists if this is carefully done. It is also possible to sell special shop paper stamps to workers who have shown interest in the paper. Workers sympathetic to the movement but not members of the party can easily be used for this work if they are made to understand its financial necessity and agitational value. Above all, the workers in the factory must not get the idea that the CP has untold funds at its disposal. They must be made to understand that the nucleus members are struggling to get the paper out and that it is imperative for them to help if they wish it to continue. Appeals for support must also be made through the columns of the paper. It has happened in some instances that workers in the factory, in response to such appeals, took it upon themselves to make collections among their friends, and personally brought the sum to the party office. It may also be possible to get a friendly shopkeeper in the neighborhood to allow a collection box for the paper to be put on his counter, and collections made by lists on his premises. In very large factories, it is possible to solicit advertising from neighboring shops. All this, just as in determining the method of distribution, is so dependent on local conditions that the nucleus members must themselves exercise the greatest ingenuity to bring about the desired result. Where to start a shop paper? How large must a factory be before it is worth while launching a shop paper? In deciding this, keep in mind that to get out an issue of a shop paper requires a great deal of time, patience, energy, and care. The prospects for good results must justify the investment of the efforts required. This means that more factors should enter into consideration than mere numbers of workers in the factory. Is it a small shop in a decisive war industry or a large shop manufacturing, let us say, buttons? If it comes to a choice, then the former by all means should be chosen. A big factor is our sources of information from within the factory. Is our nucleus small or large? Have we a following of sympathizers from whom we can get information? Will they be dependable when the terror against the suspected workers begins? Can we keep up the paper month after month? Are our workers inside spread over various departments or all concentrated in one department, which would make our material one-sided and focus attention of the spies upon that department? Judgment must be used with all these factors in mind, but a shop with less than 100 workers under any circumstances is most likely not worth the investment of party energy that goes into a good shop paper. There is one other consideration. If the only opportunity for starting a shop paper in a district is one in which all the above considerations are adverse, it might still be worthwhile making the effort for the sake of the training the party itself gets in this important work, the very fact that experience is being gained and a start made. Then, when better opportunities come later, we will be experienced and ready for them. Capitalizing organizationally on our efforts, the point on which we have so far been weakest in our shop paper work is reaping the harvest of the intense work that goes into issuing a regular shop paper. The reason for this is that the entire party is backward in shop paper work, which is only in its beginning stages, and while still trying to put the work itself on its feet, we haven't yet learned to capitalize the effects organizationally. If the nucleus doesn't grow, if the union doesn't develop, if the daily worker and labor unity don't get a foothold among the workers, then we are neglecting the concrete organizational work for which the basis should have been laid by the agitation and propaganda of the shop paper. If we have not gained the confidence of the workers sufficiently to encourage them to get into contact with us, either by correspondence or otherwise, if we have not succeeded in enlisting their support financially, then something is wrong with the appeal the paper is trying to make. Sometimes the cause is the fact that our nucleus is too small to be effective. In the effort to keep our base in the shop, in order to maintain our sources of information, the comrades are overcautious in their shop activity, to the detriment of the organizational activities. This is the great drawback in starting a paper where we have too few forces. Organizational work has to be done carefully and cautiously, but it can be done under even the most difficult circumstances. It is part of shop paper work and must not be neglected. Part 5. Miscellaneous details. There are quite a number of details in connection with getting out a shop paper, some of which are extremely important. Choosing a name. The name of the paper must mean something. It should be one which the workers take to easily. It must express our program, our fighting spirit, or the relation of the paper to the shop in question. Wherever the workers themselves have developed a nickname for the factory, it can be incorporated into the name of the paper. It should express a driving force of some kind. In the Johnson & Johnson Red Cross factory, the paper is named the Red Star. The White Motor Company's paper is the Red Motor. In the American Safety Razor Company, the paper is called the Worker's Blade. Spark plug for auto, headlight for the railroad yards, blast for a mine, all these express something. If it is impossible to find a good name, then the ordinary name of so-and-so worker will do. The name must never limit the scope of the paper, such as the so-and-so organizer or the so-and-so shop news. Face of the party. In our shop papers, the face of the party must never be hidden. Some comrades hesitate to issue the paper in the name of the nucleus for fear the workers will be prejudiced against the paper, due to the prejudices which have been instilled into the workers against anything savoring of communism. But is it conceivable that a paper can be issued without revealing the fact that communists are publishing it, when it puts forth communist views and gives communist interpretations to all events? Then why the objections to issuing the paper in the name of the party? The party is trying to get its roots in the shop. Any prestige that comes from the paper, from rallying the workers to struggle, from any successes, small or large, which were gained under the leadership of the paper, should go to the party. Some comrades who favor the issuing of the shop paper in the name of the shop committee or of the union think only of the immediate gains to be made thereby, fearing the name of the party will interfere with successful union organization within the shop. These comrades must not forget that the party must have its roots in the shop, and that it is the party which is the political spokesman of the working class. The union can issue leaflets, can hold factory gate meetings, but the regular monthly periodical in the shop, the spokesman for all the workers, interpreting their problems in the light of the class struggle, is a party publication. Therefore, we can say in general that the shop papers should be published by the party nucleus as the spokesman for all the workers in the shop. If, in special circumstances, it seems advisable to issue the paper under other auspices, this should only be done after decision by a responsible party committee. No opportunity must be lost to urge the workers to join the party. This is too often neglected. In political articles, in slogans, in articles on shop conditions, always encouragement to join, and the assurance of protection and caution. Comradely tone of paper. Some papers have developed a patronizing tone which is absolutely impermissible, for the workers must be made to feel that the shop paper is their paper, their champion, expressing their feelings and solving their problems. The Communist Party is not issuing the paper from the outside for the workers. The members of the Communist Party within the shop are issuing the paper, and do so with the cooperation of the workers in the shop, so that the paper becomes the spokesman of all the workers within the shop. Thus the term "you workers" must be avoided. The friendly and comradely tone must be struck which one would expect from any communist trying to explain to workers and to lead them. The style of writing must be the vigorous, clear, and rugged language which workers speak, and not the finished style of the college graduate. It must be orientated toward the simple and direct way in which proletarians think, and as much as possible foreign words and involved terms must be avoided. However, certain phrases which have come to be internationally used by the working class in all languages, such as proletariat, for instance, should be popularized. Slogans play an important part in shop papers, not only politically and in popularizing our party campaigns and slogans, but also technically, in breaking up the paper, giving it an attractive appearance. Care should be taken, however, that the slogans are connected up with the contents of the paper and not stuck in just to fill up space, entirely divorced from anything the paper contains. Demands. Each paper should have a set of demands which it prints in each issue. They should be simple, concrete demands, understandable to and capable of rallying the widest masses, linking up the fight for partial demands with the fight for the general class demands of the proletariat and final demands of the party. In the preparation of these demands, as wide a mass of workers in the factories should be consulted as is possible. The workers become familiar with these demands, know what the paper and what the party stands for, and in case of a strike, the most natural thing will be for them to try to adopt these demands and possibly even fight for them in face of F.L. Official resistance. Workers' correspondence has become sufficiently a feature of our party press to make any explanation of its value unnecessary here. It should be fostered in every way possible. Hostile letters should be printed and answered in an editor's note in a tactful manner. The papers should encourage the workers to write, assuring caution and protection, pointing out that grammar and style are not essential, encouraging letters in foreign languages. If the workers are shy or afraid to write, it is advisable to print out a few letters for a time written by outside comrades, but here care must be taken that they sound like real workers' letters and reveal actual conditions in the shop. The appeal to the workers to write articles on their experiences and grievances should be very prominently displayed. This is so important that a boxed space on the front page should be devoted to it. Especially in towns where the spy system and terror is very great, we must state definitely that the workers need not sign their names or addresses if they do not wish to. The correspondence which comes in from workers must serve as the basis of the entire shop news of the paper. For this reason, it is advisable not to print the letters in a special correspondence column, but to print them as articles, part and parcel of the general contents of the paper. Any conclusions which must be drawn from these articles, either politically or organizationally, can either be done in a separate article, referring to the workers' article as a basis, or the editor can add a short editor's note to the article itself. Letters written by workers should not be tampered with before being printed. In case they are extremely long, they can be cut here and there and an editorial note added, telling the worker the letter had to be cut and asking him, when he writes again, to be a little briefer. But the method of expression should not be improved, formulation should not be changed, for the workers resent having their work tampered with. The address of the paper should be conspicuously printed, and as often in each issue as necessary. When an appeal is made to join the party, the address should be printed with it. And it is advisable that each issue contain a little box in one corner of the paper giving address, price, editor, communist nucleus, etc., just as any newspaper. The address should be easily found by the worker, for sometimes we can catch him to obey that impulse if we make it easy for him. Printing the address in the middle or end of a long article is inadvisable, for every worker does not read every article in the paper. Every appeal to read the Daily Worker should have the D.W. address. Every appeal to send funds for some purpose or other must not fail to have the address, no matter how often it appears elsewhere in the paper. Date and number. Putting the date on the paper and the number of the issue seems like an unimportant matter, but why not try to be as much like a newspaper as possible? How much easier is it to refer to previous issues or to certain issues of brother shop papers elsewhere when occasion arises, to say nothing of making easier the task of the party reviewer at the center? Clever devices to make the subject matter as interesting as possible, especially in treating of subjects usually considered dry by the workers, is of paramount importance. Marxian economics can be easily and simply explained by means of imaginary conversations between workers in the shop, one of them class-conscious, and the other who doesn't understand much but is eager to learn and asks questions. In this way also the imperceptible wage-cutting tricks of the boss can be explained, also how races are played against one another, etc. A tour through a department in the factory each month, written in a lively sarcastic style, has been used with great success, rousing interest and amusement, and showing up various abuses in a style free from all monotony. Daily Worker. It is unnecessary to explain the importance of pushing the Daily Worker, and practically no shop papers have sinned in this respect. Our language press must also be pushed in those factories where large sections of one nationality are employed. There are no issues. Some comrades working in shops resist the launching of a shop paper there by claiming that conditions there are so much better than in other shops that there are no issues to write about. This is nonsense. There is no shop under capitalism where exploitation does not take place and where consequent abuses do not inevitably follow. Sometimes the comrades, along with all the other workers in the shop, don't even realize the number of abuses in the shop because they are so accustomed to them. So when any worker says there are no issues, a little questioning on very simple matters will bring out hundreds of little abuses which the workers don't look upon as issues. For instance, the matter of strictness of discipline which the workers instinctively resent, where a worker is docked a half hour for being a minute late. An item on such an issue is appreciated by the workers and they quickly react to it. Where the factory doesn't furnish waste or other materials for the workers to wipe the grease and dirt from their hands, dirty toilets, bullying foremen, wage cuts, speed up, various forms of discrimination, stool pigeons, accidents, all these things are real issues around which workers can be mobilized for struggle. Special editions of the bulletin, besides the regular monthly edition, should be issued whenever an event of more than ordinary interest happens in the factory, and these special editions, even though they may have to be limited just to one page, must be ready promptly, immediately after the event, when the interest of the workers is at its highest. Such occasions would be the posting of a wage cut, a bad accident, the firing of a worker for union or shop paper activity, etc., etc. Any such event must be taken advantage of not only to call for the proper action, but also to make the proper communist analysis organizationally and politically. These special editions must not be confused with the special numbers devoted to party campaigns such as Unemployment Day, Anti-War Day, etc. Light features a paper without humor and other light touches will be a monotonous affair. Joke columns called by some appropriate name and run in each issue, containing humorous happenings from the shop as well as jokes, should be featured in all papers. Striking observations on the class struggle and current events should be included. But the jokes should not be silly futile things, divorced from the class struggle. It is a good idea to make collections of jokes which can be used in future, and to get those from other shop papers and adapt them if necessary. Comparisons between local conditions and Russian conditions, given tersely and without flourishes, are very effective sprinkled through columns of this sort. Quotations from communist writers can be sprinkled throughout the paper, as the Daily Worker does it, but they should not be disconnected from the rest of the contents of the paper and should not be involved. We must again keep in mind that we are directing our paper to the broad masses of workers, and putting an involved quotation from Marx into the paper just to fill up a small space is incomprehensible to them. If it follows an article with which there is some connection, that is a different story. Such quotations can also be collected and kept for use at appropriate times. Verse poems, if not too long, add to the attraction of a paper, but too much space must not be allotted to them. If sent in by workers in the factory, they should be printed if at all suitable. Mass organizations. There are two evils which have developed in connection with the non-party mass organizations under party guidance. One is that enough space is not given to them, to explanations of what they are doing, and to recruiting for them. Sometimes appeals for funds are published for one or the other, without any explanation of their value to the working class struggle. The other evil is the opposite extreme. Sometimes one can find appeals to workers to join 5 or 6 different organizations all in one issue. This only confuses the worker unfamiliar with any of them. Choose the proper occasion. If there is an article on the Atlanta cases, for instance, then run an international labor defense appeal somewhere near it, but separately from it, with a brief explanation of the activities of the organization. If the article is on some large strike, push the role of the workers' international relief. If it is the anti-Soviet campaign and conspiracy, play up the friends of the Soviet Union, and so on. Abbreviations. If the habit of the party to call organizations by their initials has become confusing to even the party members, how much more confusing it must be to the average workers reading in the shop papers about such mysterious things as ILD, FSU, WIR, IWO, TUUL, LSNR, Comintern, Profintern, Crescentern, XI, Polcom, etc. Abbreviations should be avoided. Advertising meetings and advertising meetings to which we want the workers to come, it is advisable, in addition to giving a brief description of the purpose of the meeting, to print a form like a ticket which will entitle bearer to free admission into the meeting. This not only draws the workers to the meetings, but gives us a means of checking up to some extent how the influence of the shop paper is growing among the workers. Company organs. As a general rule, the papers the boss puts out are feeble and weak affairs, but sometimes they are very clever and vicious. In either case, they must not be overlooked or ignored. The first kind must be ridiculed and the second seriously combated ideologically, with all its tricks exposed. Part 6. Technical makeup. There are 3 main methods of technically getting out a shop paper: printing, mimeographing, and multigraphing. Many comrades take for granted that printing is the best method. It has its advantages, but also great disadvantages. Printed shop paper's neatness in appearance is one of the great advantages of printing. The shop papers look more like the miniature newspaper they are supposed to be. But 2 great drawbacks counterbalance these considerations: the expense and the superior advantage the mimeograph paper has for profuse illustrations and original work. It may be found that it is easier to sell a printed paper than a mimeographed one, which deserves great consideration, especially if the amounts realized from the sales will practically cover the difference in price between mimeographed and printed papers. Multigraphed shop papers. Multigraphing has the same disadvantages as printing in the matter of expense and even more restriction in the use of illustrations, so that unless the nucleus happens to be in a position to operate a multigraph without cost, there is no advantage. Mimeographed shop papers. There are 2 arguments against mimeographed papers. One is that the worker is used to high-grade paper and printing in the company organs and will look with contempt on the homemade variety. This argument will not stand examination. In any case, we can't compete with the very expensive company organs and capitalist periodicals, and the amateurishness of the mimeograph paper, if well executed, will make the worker feel more that it is his own because every bit of it is done by his fellow workers in the shop. The other argument is that for very large shops, with thousands of workers, mimeographing is out of the question, not only because the stencil does not produce good results after 1,000 copies, but also because the entire work involved of assembling and clopping, etc., is so tremendous. This is perfectly true. Taking all arguments pro and con, the mimeograph paper, except in the case of a factory of more than 1,000 workers, is far superior. But that means that the technical work on the mimeograph bulletin must be done with exactly the same care and skill as the writing. Very attractive results can be obtained, even more attractive than in the printed papers. This is no easy task and requires the work of a typist who is not only skillful in general, but one who is experienced in this particular kind of work, and who can use judgment in the arrangement of the material as the stencil is being cut. To get the best results, it is advisable to assign a typist to each paper, which means intensive work for her once a month to get out her particular paper. She becomes familiar with the paper, with the conditions in the shop, with the manner in which the nucleus works, and can use not only technical but also political judgment in arranging the material which is given to her. Insertion of slogans or announcements at strategic places, splitting up articles too long for one page without interfering with others, etc. The great advantage in mimeographing, besides the low expense, is the ease with which cartoons and illustrations can be inserted. Any kind of picture can be traced onto the stencil by the most inexperienced hand. It is wise to make collections of pictures from newspapers, daily worker cartoons, etc., to be used at appropriate times. In the case of printing, cuts always have to be made of every picture, which increases the expense and consequently decreases the number of illustrations. Another advantage of mimeographing is the fact that the nucleus can do the work and thus does away with the ever-present evil in shop paper work, that of the district or section taking all the burden of the work of getting out the paper and absolving the nucleus from all responsibility. Common technical faults. The first consideration in the technical work is that the material must be readable. The prejudice against the mimeograph papers arises largely from the fact that they are executed badly and the result is an unreadable mess. A well-executed mimeograph paper is more attractive than a printed paper. The commonest fault is the attempt to crowd too much material on each page at the expense of the appearance of the paper. This is carried to such an extreme that sometimes the two columns run together in an indistinguishable manner, and the margins on the stencils are so narrow that the paper won't take the print properly and the material is absolutely unreadable. Sufficient care is not taken in running them off the mimeograph, resulting in the smearing of pages against each other. This is sometimes due to using the wrong quality of paper. In some cases, the paper is too thin to take both sides, resulting in a blurred effect, from the print on each side showing through on the other. Some papers don't separate their articles clearly enough, subheads being run exactly as titles of fresh articles. This creates confusion. When an article breaks off at the foot of the column, quite frequently there is no indication where it is continued. A really skillful typist will arrange her material so that as few articles as possible need to run over onto other pages. In some cases, articles have been continued on 3 or 4 different additional pages, just wherever there happened to be space for a few lines. This can easily be avoided by a little forethought in planning the arrangement of the paper. Where the material is run in a solid mass, instead of in 2 columns, it is not tempting to the average worker to read. Dividing lines between columns improve the appearance. Illustrations. Too few mimeograph papers take advantage of the ease with which illustrations can be inserted either by original drawing or tracings from elsewhere to liven up the page. Perhaps the comrades begrudge the space, for when there is important material on hand and a cartoon takes up half a page of already limited space, one hesitates. But a cartoon can say as much in more than a half-page article in many cases. Many papers have also found attractive effects by putting in a very small but pointed illustration with the titles of articles. They need not have any particular political significance. A humorous or satirical illustration is sometimes even better, leaving the political ideas to the larger cartoons. Breaking the solid appearance in mimeographing, the page can easily be broken up by the insertion of slogans, short announcements, etc. This breaks the heavy solid appearance and avoids monotony. The masthead, the name of the paper, should never be printed in ordinary type and should always be accompanied by some suitable illustration or design. This should be the same month after month in order that the workers become familiar with it and recognize it instantly as their shop paper. It should have some connection with the shop. The German party has found it feasible to have cuts made of the mastheads of some of their papers and a large supply printed to be used each month as the first page of the mimeograph paper. In general, technique is a matter of experience, and it is impossible to write of every small detail. The basic considerations are that the paper is easily readable and attractive in appearance. Conclusion: much of the material treated in this pamphlet is ABC to the comrades experienced in shop paper work, and they may wonder why so many simple details are given space here. When one realizes the inexperience and ignorance in general of how to get out a shop paper among many comrades, we will realize how necessary so elementary a treatment of the problem is. It still occurs that agitprop directors who have never had anything to do with shop paper work haven't the least conception of how complicated a job it is. Not only unit agitprop directors, but also section and even district's agitprop directors still think it sufficient to hand out to some comrade who knows how to write a few facts about a shop and ask him to have a finished shop paper the next day ready for distribution. A perusal of this pamphlet will make them realize what enormous and painstaking care is involved in getting out a real communist shop paper. This document has treated only of shop papers in the strict sense of the word. Those organs of the party closely related to the shop paper, such as neighborhood papers, tenement papers, papers for a factory building containing many shops, papers for unemployed districts, etc., have not been taken up, since this is only the first step in getting out instructions for this work and cannot possibly treat of all its ramifications. There has been so little exchange of experiences in the field of shop paper work that it becomes of great importance for comrades who have had to face problems in this work to write into the National Agitprop Department, describing the difficulties met with and how they were overcome, thus giving other comrades the benefits of their experiences. As we turn our attention more to the industries and try to build up our influence among the industrial proletariat, we will learn to appreciate this weapon more and more. The resolution on factory newspapers endorsed by the Org Bureau of the ECCI says, this importance, the organizational as well as agitational significance of the factory papers, increases considerably in times of economic crisis and unemployment, because the factory papers are one of the best means of most intensively influencing the broad non-communist masses, without thereby, given proper publication and distribution, subjecting the nuclei to the employer's terror. The conference of the agitprop departments of 7 European Communist parties held in 1930 passed a resolution on the immediate tasks of the agitprop work of the mid-European sections of the Comintern, which includes the following. Factory newspapers are an important means of strengthening party work in the factories and are of exceptional importance for winning over the decisive sections of the working class, for mobilizing them around our slogans and our economic and political activities, and for recruiting new supporters to the revolutionary trade union movement and new members of the party. And Y.C.L. and Lenin said, throughout the year the workers, first in one place and then in another, continuously present a variety of partial demands to their employers and fight for these demands. In assisting the workers in this fight, communists must always explain the connection it has with the proletarian struggle for emancipation in all countries. How better can we reach the factory worker to accomplish this task than through the communist shop paper?